I learned very early that silence could keep you alive. If I stayed quiet, if I stayed hidden, if I never gave anyone a reason to look too closely, then I could exist without being punished for it. That was what Corvina taught me after my father died. Not with gentle words, but with locked doors, cold stares, and the constant reminder that my face, my existence, was something to be ashamed of. The night Magnus Holt walked into the Crosswind estate, I was sitting on the floor of my room, eating bread that had gone stale 2 days earlier. I always ate after everyone else. It was easier that way. The walls were thin enough that I could hear laughter from downstairs. The sound of glasses clinking, Corvina's practiced voice floating through the house like she owned the air itself. I was reaching for my veil when I heard a man's voice interrupt her. Calm, controlled, unafraid. You're wrong, he said. Those numbers don't support your conclusion. I froze. No one ever corrected Corvina. I didn't know why I spoke. Maybe because the mistake was obvious. Maybe because I'd spent years studying financial reports in secret, the only thing that made me feel real. The words slipped out before fear could stop them. They do actually, I said from behind the door. But only if you ignore the depreciation rate you listed as fixed. It isn't. The room downstairs went silent. I pressed my hand over my mouth, heart racing. I waited for Corvina's footsteps, for the sharp command to disappear, to be quiet, to remember my place. Instead, there was a pause, followed by slow footsteps approaching the hallway. Who said that? The man asked. Corvina laughed too quickly. No one important. My stepdaughter. She isn't well. The lock on my door clicked. I hadn't realized it was unlocked. When the door opened, I kept my head down, fingers clutching the edge of my veil. I expected disgust. Pity. Something sharp. What I didn't expect was the silence that followed, heavy but not cruel. Look at me, the man said. I didn't. That's fine, he added after a moment. You don't have to. I risked a glance. Magnus Holt stood in the doorway, tall, composed, his expression unreadable. His eyes weren't fixed on my veil. They were on me, as if he were trying to understand something instead of judge it. You're smarter than everyone in that room, he said. And they locked you up here. Corvina's voice snapped from behind him. She's confused. She imagines things. He didn't turn to her. No. You do. That was the first time I saw fear flicker across Corvina's face. He returned the next morning. And the next. Each time he asked me questions about markets, contracts, trends. He never once asked me to remove my veil. He never spoke about my face at all. On the 4th day he said, I want you to marry me. I laughed before I could stop myself. Came out wrong, broken. You don't even know what I look like. I know exactly who you are, he replied. That's what matters. Corvina tried to intervene. She talked about my fragility, my condition, my inability to make decisions. Magnus listened, nodded once, then said something that changed everything. If she stays here, he said calmly, she will disappear. If she marries me, she will be protected. Choose. He looked at me when he said it. I married him because I was afraid. Afraid of Corvina, afraid of staying, afraid of what would happen if I refused. Love had nothing to do with it. I told myself that from the beginning. The world did not understand his choice. The headlines called me a mystery. A mistake. A liability. I stayed silent and let them talk. Silence had always been my shield. Living with Magnus was nothing like living with Corvina. He didn't monitor my movements. He didn't control my meals or my sleep. He didn't demand gratitude. He gave me space and expected nothing in return. When I apologized for things, small things, meaningless things, he frowned and said, You don't need to earn the right to exist here. That sentence stayed with me longer than I expected. The first time I accused him of using me, it was because I overheard a meeting. I wasn't eavesdropping on purpose. I just happened to be passing by when I heard my name, followed by words like leverage and acquisition. I confronted him that night. You needed access, I said, my voice shaking. That's why you married me. He didn't deny it. That hurt more than if he had. Yes, he said. And because if I hadn't, Corvina would have had you declared unfit within the month. I didn't know what to say to that. I didn't know how to feel. Then the papers arrived. Legal documents declaring me mentally incompetent. Signed by Corvina. Filed publicly. Thought I would break. I thought the fear would swallow me whole. Instead something else rose up. Anger maybe. Or clarity. The hearing was crowded. Corvina stood confident, elegant, explaining my scar as proof of instability. When she ordered me to remove my veil, my hands trembled, but I did it anyway. The room didn't react the way she expected. Magnus stood and placed medical records on the table. Proof of neglect. Proof that my illness had been ignored, untreated, allowed to worsen until damage became permanent. The truth didn't need drama. It spoke for itself. Corvina was arrested that day. Later, Magnus handed me annulment papers. "I won't trap you," he said. Not like she did. I looked at him for a long time. Then I signed not my freedom but my choice. I stayed. Not because I was rescued. Not because I was saved. But because for the first time in my life someone saw me clearly, and didn't ask me to disappear. And that was enough. The marriage did not change the way I woke up in the mornings. I still opened my eyes expecting to feel watched, expecting a voice to tell me I was late, careless, wrong. The difference was that the silence here did not feel like a threat. It felt like space. Magnus left early most days. When he didn't, he knocked before entering any room I occupied, even though the house was legally ours. That alone unsettled me more than cruelty ever had. I didn't know how to be a wife. I didn't know what was expected of me. Corvina had trained me to believe that my presence was a burden, so I tried to make myself smaller. I stayed in rooms that were easy to clean up after. I spoke only when spoken to. Old habits clung to me stubbornly. Magnus noticed. "You don't have to disappear here," he said one evening, when I declined dinner for the third time that week. "I'm not hungry," I replied automatically. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "All right. But you're welcome whenever you are." No lecture. No suspicion. Just an open door. The world outside the house was louder than I expected. Reporters speculated. Investors questioned his judgment. Some of his board members looked at me as if I were an equation that didn't balance. I stayed quiet during public events, my veil firmly in place, my arm resting lightly in the crook of his elbow. Magnus never tightened his grip. He never guided me. He let me walk at my own pace. That mattered more than he knew. At night we sat across from each other in the living room, often not speaking at all. I read. He worked. The silence between us was comfortable, unforced. Sometimes I caught him watching me, not in a way that made me feel owned, but as if he were memorizing something fragile. One evening I asked him why he never asked about my scar. "I already know what it cost you," he said. "I don't need details to respect it." I didn't answer. My throat closed around words I wasn't ready to release. Slowly, without any grand moment, I began to exist more. I walked through the house without counting my steps. I spoke during meetings when Magnus asked for my opinion. The first time I corrected a senior executive, the room went quiet. Magnus didn't interrupt. He waited until I finished, then said, "That's the direction we'll take." No one argued. I started sleeping through the night. The trust crept in quietly. That was what frightened me most. The night everything shifted, I was heading toward the study to return a book when I heard voices. Magnus' voice was low, controlled. Others responded in tones I didn't recognize. I stopped, not because I meant to listen but because my name surfaced between sentences. "Legal access through marriage," someone said. "Crosswind assets," another added. My chest tightened. I stood there longer than I should have, the words stacking up in my head, forming something sharp and familiar. When Magnus found me later, standing in the hallway with the book still clutched in my hands, he knew immediately. "You heard," he said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just asked, was I a strategy? He didn't lie. That hurt more than anything else could have. "At first," he said. "Yes." The room felt suddenly smaller. "I told you from the beginning that this marriage wasn't built on romance," he continued. "But it was never meant to harm you." I laughed quietly. Intent doesn't erase impact. He didn't argue. "I stopped Corvina from filing those papers months ago," he said. "She was preparing to take everything from you, including your freedom." I stared at him, trying to reconcile the man who gave me space with the man who made plans around my life without asking. "You could have told me," I said. "Yes," he replied. "And I should have." I left the room before he could say anything else. I needed air. I needed distance. The safety I had begun to believe in felt suddenly conditional. That night I slept in a guest room. The next morning the papers arrived anyway. Corvina had filed them through a different channel, faster than either of us anticipated, declaring me incompetent, unstable, unfit to manage my inheritance. The fear was different this time. It wasn't paralyzing. It was focused. Magnus was furious, not loud, not explosive, but sharp in a way that made everyone around him move faster. Lawyers appeared. Documents were retrieved. Evidence that had been buried was pulled into the light. He asked me what I wanted to do. No one had ever asked me that before. I want to speak, I said. The hearing was worse than I imagined. Corvina looked at ease as if she had always belonged in that room. When she spoke about me, she used the same soft tone she'd used when explaining my condition to guests. She described my scar as proof of fragility, my silence as instability. When she told me to remove my veil, my hands shook. Not because I was ashamed, but because I understood what she was trying to take from me. I removed it anyway. The room did not collapse. No one gasped. No one turned away. Magnus stood beside me when he presented the records. Proof that my illness had been ignored. Proof that treatment had been withheld intentionally. Proof that my scar was not a curse but evidence. Corvina's expression cracked for the first time. When it was over, when she was escorted out, I expected to feel victorious. I didn't. I felt tired. Relieved maybe. Empty in a quiet way. That evening, Magnus handed me the annulment papers. I won't be another person who decides your life for you, he said. You don't owe me anything. I read the document slowly. My hands were steady. You gave me a choice, I said. Yes. I looked at him. Really looked at him. At the man who could have controlled me and chose restraint instead. At the man who made mistakes and owned them without excuses. I'm staying, I said. Not because I'm protected. Because I want to. He didn't smile. He just nodded once, as if accepting something precious and dangerous all at the same time. For the first time the choice was mine. And I did not hide from it. Staying did not fix everything. It didn't erase the years I had spent shrinking myself, or the instinct to apologize before speaking. It didn't make the world suddenly gentle. What it did was force me to learn how to live without waiting for permission. The days after the hearing were strangely quiet. Corvina was gone. Her presence no longer hung over every decision like a threat. I expected relief to rush in all at once. Instead it came slowly in fragments. I chose my own clothes. I ate when I was hungry. I walked into rooms without rehearsing excuses. Magnus gave me distance not because he wanted it but because he respected it. When we spoke it was honest. Careful. Neither of us pretended the marriage had started for the right reasons. We also didn't pretend it hadn't changed us. One evening I found him in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, reading something on his tablet. He looked up and asked, "Do you want to come with me tomorrow?" "To where?" "A board meeting. Or you can stay here. Either way." I realized then that he had stopped assuming. That mattered. I went. They listened to me. Not because I was his wife but because I knew what I was talking about. When I spoke I didn't rush. I didn't soften my words. I didn't look at Magnus for approval. He watched anyway, his expression unreadable, but there was something steady in his gaze that grounded me. Afterward in the car he said, "You don't hide anymore." "I don't want to," I replied. The words surprised me with how easily they came. That night I removed my veil before he asked. I folded it carefully and set it aside as if closing a chapter without ceremony. He didn't reach for me. He waited. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted. "I've never been chosen without conditions." "I won't rush you," he said. "But I won't lie to you either. I care about you." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rehearsed. It was honest, and that made it heavier than any promise. The world eventually moved on. Scandals always do. Corvina's name faded from headlines. Mine stopped being paired with words like fragile and mysterious. I became something simpler. A woman with a voice. A woman with a choice. One morning I stood in front of the mirror without flinching. The scar was still there. It always would be. But it no longer defined the limits of my life. Magnus came up behind me and said quietly, "You don't owe the past your future." I leaned into him not because I needed to be held but because I wanted to be close. Our marriage was never about rescue. It was about refusal. The refusal to let cruelty decide who I was allowed to become. I didn't hide my face anymore. And for the first time I wasn't afraid of being seen.